Welcome to the World of Gamer Zone. I'm David Sickman. My usual co-host, Meredith O'Donnell, isn't with us today for a pretty particular reason. We're actually down at the KTQW Wichita studio shooting a pre-introduction to what's essentially a clip show. KTQW has been airing us for a little bit now, and they decided, hey, you guys got some viewers, let's kind of rerun episode 1 so that everybody's got the fundamentals of the World of Gamer Zone. I hate episode 1. I really hate episode 1. Plus, if you want to run the fundamentals, really you need a piece out of episode 1, a piece out of episode 2, and a piece out of episode 5 to make it all work. So, I'm down here recording this little pre-introduction and introducing each one of the segments and why they're so important to this. This first segment, for instance, is on the ESRB. During each one of our reviews, we address the ESRB, tell you what about the what's called descriptors for an episode or for a game, so that you understand what is it that makes this game rated what it is. Is it appropriate for kids? Is it appropriate for adults? What's the whole deal behind it? So check it out. Hope you enjoy. Now for our segment on the ESRB. Now most of you have probably seen little symbols on the edges of game boxes that say T for teen, AO, various different acronyms. We're going to actually explain a little bit about them because they're a little bit more in depth than you might expect. And the other thing about it is most people don't really know or understand how they work. Well, I'm going to also give a little background first. The ESRB was actually created in 1994. Part of what happened was the big controversy over Mortal Kombat's fatality system, where you could pull the heads off people and pull their spines out, blood, guts, and gore everywhere. This was the line where people started realizing that maybe not everything's appropriate for everyone. The ESRB was created by the Entertainment Software Association, which is basically all the publishers kind of get together and create a self-governing body that says, hey, these are the rules we're going to live by. The system is used by 350 different publishers currently, and there's always more added. Publishers don't have to use the ESRB. There's no law on the books currently that says they have to, though there is one that's in the works right now. But the truth is, unless you're using the ESRB content guides, you're not going to see your game on shelves at Walmart or anywhere else besides as a download-only game. And there's a reason for that. Not only do parents get to use this as an opportunity to figure out what games are appropriate for the kids and what games aren't, it's also what the retailers use to decide what they think is appropriate in their stores too. That makes it a very important and a very powerful item to know about. And we're going to start off with, what do each one of these symbols mean? Their first one, early childhood, EC. Simply put, an EC rated title should be suitable for any child over 3.
These would be something like the Rita Rabbits or the Einstein games.
Yeah, exactly.
That are for the babies.
Titles that are rated E should be available and accessible to anybody above the age of 6. Most of these games won't have anything offensive in them, though keep in mind the term offensive. Religious content is offensive to some people, and this is only defining certain attributes like alcohol use, blood, guts, gore. So just because it's rated this way doesn't mean that parents don't necessarily need to take a look at the game. E10 plus. With that, anybody 10 years or older should be able to play this game. These sort of titles may start getting into the point where they're containing fantasy violence, cartoon violence, things like this. At this point, you're starting to see games where you might even start seeing some animated blood. T for teen. This is the largest category because teens are the biggest consumer of video games. Teen, in this case, is rated anybody 13 years or older. At this point, you might start actually seeing more than just mild violence. You might start seeing heavy violence. You might start seeing blood. Though keep in mind, when we get to the content descriptors, we're going to explain the difference between the different levels of blood. Crude humor, nothing that you wouldn't already see on TV. Mature rated titles are actually where there's the largest, one might say the largest problem with video games right now. Great example, Halo is rated M for mature. Except for, I know for a fact, a lot of parents have bought Halo for their kids. This is where parental discretion becomes important. This is a mature title. It's considered to be appropriate for anybody 17 years or older. Well, I know a lot of parents that have no problem with their kids playing Halo. You've seen Halo, right?
I've seen Halo.
There's really not, it's not heavy violence as in blood, guts, and gore. There's not stuff splattering all over the walls. So I can understand why some parents look at it and go, it's appropriate for our kids. Again, these are guidelines, and you still have to make the decision yourself based off of each one. Adults only. This is definitely for adults only. A person's 18 years or older. Most of the titles that have been titled adults only have not been because of violence, blood, guts, or gore. It's been because of sexual content, nudity, things like that. Of course, recently there was the hot coffee mod for Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, where this unlocks the whole scene where people can have, well, simulated sex. This caused a big row because this title was actually labeled as being M for mature. Mm-hmm. This content did ship with the game. Now, it did require a third-party product to unlock it, but it was in there, it shipped with it, so when the ESRB got a hold of this, they felt that this was inappropriate and retitled it after it shipped. It's now listed as an adults-only game. There's one more rating, and that's essentially an unrated game. RP, rating pending. Typically, you will never see a game on the shelf with RP on it. In fact, instead, what you'll see that is in advertising. That's part of something else that I haven't mentioned yet. Even the advertisements that go out that have a rating on them.
I'm not sure any games have been put out with RP, actually sold with RP.
I don't think there has been either. I'm not positive, but I don't think there has been.
We've done this with videos, but we haven't done them with games.
The second part to the ESRB rating system is called the descriptors. What these are a further description of what's in a title. For instance, instead of just saying it's T for teen, it says it's T for teen plus contains animated blood, violence, adult themes, things like this. Those allow you to more fine-grained understand what's happening in this title. Now, some of the descriptors, for instance, have multiple versions of the same one. For instance, violence. There's cartoon violence. There's We're going to go over those real quick here.
To start with, we're gonna start talking about the blood. Now, there's just blood, which is depictions of blood. That's all that means. Now, there are two other descriptors. One is animated blood. Animated blood means it's discolored blood. It's unrealistic depictions of blood. It's cartoony. Then you get into blood and gore, which is mutilated body parts. It's a little more graphic, not something you're going to see on E for Everyone.
Violence is also the same way. There's cartoon violence. Basically, non-human looking characters go about it. It may be quite possible that when you're done with the violent scene, that one of the character that was hurt, damaged, or killed gets back up and is unharmed.
Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner.
Exactly. There's fantasy violence. Basically, non-human characters. They're set in a setting that typically doesn't feel completely realistic. Then there's one that's just violence, which basically says indications of aggressive conflict. For instance, two teams going at it with guns. Now keep in mind, when I say violence, that doesn't cover the blood and gore portion of it. That's what those descriptors are for. You can have violence without the blood and the gore. Intense violence. This gets serious at it. This is pretty much reserved for some really, really heavy-duty stuff that most people won't see written on a title anyways. Mild violence. Scenes that depict violence but are not very intense at all.
Now you also have references to alcohol, references to tobacco, and references to drugs. That means that there are images of this. It doesn't necessarily mean they're being used, they're just in the scene. They're actually covered under a different title if they're being used.
For use, you have use of alcohol, use of tobacco, and use of, when they say drugs, they're referring to very specifically illegal drugs like marijuana, cocaine, things like this that break a lot of rules. You wouldn't normally see this sort of use on TV. You might see references on TV, but you would never see this sort of use on TV for drugs.
Now, most of the descriptors that we have been referencing to so far have been for those kids who play games on their own. It's really for the 10-year-olds, 6-year-olds, and up to adult. Now, the next couple that we're going to talk about are really for the little kids. These are the games and the different kind of titles that parents will do with the children and with very young toddlers. The first one is some adult assistance may be needed. This is intended for the very young ages. These are really for the toddler games. The next one is called edutainment. This is for, it provides skills, it provides entertainment that actually educates the child. It has a little more of a learning process to it. The last one is informational. This is basically content that contains data or facts, resources, information, things like that.
I'm going to lump a couple of categories together this time. Cartoon mischief. Basically, think, again, Wile E. Coyote, Roadrunner, these sort of things. It doesn't just cover the violence level of it, it also covers what's happening in it, the jokes, the things like this. Crude humor, stuff you'd pretty much see on TV. Ren and Stimpy, any of those would cover as crude humor. But there's also lyrics is a great example. Well, let's face it, some of the stuff that you hear on the radio, there's some strong language in it. Lyrics covers that there's some songs here that have some strong content.
And
strong lyrics.
Basically, if it's in the background, it's going to be listed.
Oh yes, oh yes. Strong lyrics, well, let's face it, there's some gangster rap and some of that stuff that have some seriously twisted lyrics involved that they may end up in a game, and they made a content descriptor for it. I don't think I've ever actually seen one listed with strong lyrics, but they've got it there just in case they need it. Language, as in the use of cursing, things like that. The language one actually means mild to moderate use. Strong language means heavy-duty use, F-bombs used all over the place, things like that.
There are two different descriptors for gambling. There's real gambling, which is you can lose money. You're putting up money for this game, and you could lose it. You could also win it. There's also simulated gaming. This is basically games that you can play that are against other players, but you're not going to lose any money. There may be points involved. You can win, you can lose, but you're not actually going to lose anything out of your pocket.
The last part involves all the sexuality possibilities for game content. For instance, nudity, partial nudity. Well, partial nudity might be a topless character. Nudity means, well, basically full frontal nudity, that sort of thing. Sexual themes. Sexual themes actually can be a little bit ambiguous. It doesn't necessarily mean there's sex involved in the game. It just means that there could be some themes that are a little more mature than most of the kids need to be involved with. Strong sexual content. If it says strong sexual content, usually means there's out and out sex involved in the game. Sexual violence. At this point, you're looking at, well, violent depictions of sex, rape, things like this that are extremely not appropriate for kids. There's actually one more descriptor left to cover, and that is online play. Every game that allows for online play does have a notice that says online gameplay experience may differ. In that case, one of the reasons why they said is some games allow for modding, basically the changing of content for players to adjust things, add new skins, new models, things like this. There's nothing that prevents a player from coming up with something crude and sexual or extremely violent that falls completely outside of these descriptors, or that may allow for online chat. When that happens, well, anything goes. You can see the entire list of descriptors at esrb.org. That's all we're going to talk about today with the ESRB. Hope this helped to educate you a little bit more about it. Now this next segment is what we call breaking into games. The basic premise of this is that over the years I got a ton of questions about how to get into developing video games as an independent developer or as a professional or just a hobbyist. This first episode set up the basis for the rest of the episodes on breaking into games. We want to start covering a lot of information on game development. One of the things I've been doing since about 1999 is writing video games. I've done contract work for others, I've done puzzle games for myself and released them. So I end up with a whole lot of questions. How does one get into video games? Well, the question is, how do you want to get into video games? There's more than one style of video game developer. That's what I'm going to cover a little bit about today. For instance, the standard developer that everybody thinks about is the professional who goes in, 9-to-5 job. Actually, in professional game development, it's usually about an 8 to, oh my god, o'clock job. It's not your standard fare for work. However, you get paid a standard paycheck just like everybody else does. And honestly, it's actually a fairly boring job in a lot of ways. This is what most people think about when they say, I want to get into game development. It's actually the hardest part of game development to get into. A degree in computer science, for instance, really does very little for you. What they look for is people who have completed projects, people who have done work already in the game industry. In other words, that's right, unless you've worked in the game industry, you can't work in the game industry. That's not completely true, but that's most of the time the case. Instead, most people start as something called an independent developer. What's an independent developer? Well, that falls into a whole bunch of classifications. For instance, you have mod authors. These are people that take a pre-existing game. For instance, we'll say Half-Life. Half-Life is a grand example of independent game development at work. Half-Life was released by Valve. Then later on, somebody else came up with this cool idea called Counter-Strike. Counter-Strike is now the most played PC game on the internet, period, bar none. But it was developed by a small group of guys who, in their spare time, come up with graphics. They came up with everything necessary for weaponry, gameplay, everything else, and they released it essentially to the community for free for people to check out. Nowadays, you can buy Counter-Strike on the shelves.
This is connected to Half-Life, and
what they did is they started out with a full copy of Half-Life, and they went, let's see. Well, if we started changing these little graphics here, if we started adding this little bit of sound here, if we take this out, incorporating new elements to an existing game until finally you got to a point there was no longer the original game, there was instead an entirely new game. And that's what mod authors do.
and no copyright infringement.
No copyright infringement. As a matter of fact, not only are most games allowed to do this, as long as you're not selling it, most game companies now encourage it. For instance, Electronic Arts has Battlefield 2. Well, they have started releasing some of the tools necessary for people to build mods or modifications for Battlefield 2. One of the reasons why a lot of game development companies are now releasing tools like this is it makes their games last longer. So the longer it stays on shelves, the more money they make. So mod authors have an interesting thing that they do. By doing these projects and doing one from start to finish, they prove to a game development company that yes, they can be a game developer. Yes, they have what it takes to do the programming, to do the design work, and to do all the pieces necessary to put a game together. Games are hard. Games are extremely hard. So any proof that you can do the job helps a lot. Now, most mods do not get sold online, do not make money. That's not really what they're there for. They're just there to increase somebody's enjoyment of the game. However, independent developers, as in programmers, will also produce games from scratch. Now, some games are produced all the way from the very bottom of it, meaning you write your own engines, basically the core piece of the programming that does most of the work. You write your own scripting systems. You write everything from beginning to end. Some independent developers actually still do that. That sort of process usually takes anywhere from 3 to 4 years before you complete a project. There's shortcuts though. Companies like Garage Games produce the Torque engine. You just license the engine. You now have the engine core. You have your scripting systems. In fact, they actually have a couple of demo games that go sit on top of it. And now it's a little bit more like being a mod author. You have everything necessary that you can sell the game when you're done, but you don't necessarily have to have everything from scratch. This sort of approach is actually also starting to be taken by a lot of the professionals too. Garage Games has enjoyed a little bit of success with selling their products to Electronic Arts and a number of them, but there's other engines like Cryotech. The IDS engine from Doom 3 has been used a number of times. Quake's engine, all of these different parts can be reused over and over. However, most of these are extremely expensive. For instance, IDS engine, prepared to spend $250,000 just for the core of it. That's not including the percentage that you lose off the top for every copy that you sell. So you have to balance between, hey, do I have enough money to do this sort of thing? To, can I just write it myself?
How many games are based off of IDS engine?
Historically, there's probably, through all of IDS iterations of their engines, there's probably at least 3 dozen. A number of them, actually, oddly enough, we started off with Half-Life. Half-Life's actually a modified version of the Quake engine, one of IDS various engines. So, which makes Counter-Strike even funnier because Counter-Strike's actually a mod of
a mod.
Of a mod, exactly. Now then, there's also the hobbyist developer. The hobbyist developer...
That would be you?
No, actually. I do it for money. I like that green stuff. The hobbyist developer doesn't care about the green stuff. Sometimes they do it for a matter of research. I've seen a number of projects that were done nothing more than for college credit. It was a great way to learn more about game development and at the same time get credit for new concepts and new designs and new ideas in games. This is great, and there's a number of games that you can find online, especially for Linux and a number of them, that you can download for free because a hobbyist developer decided he was going to take his work and give it away to others, including some of them give you the source code, basically all the programming necessary to turn that game into something else if you want to. There's some rules and restrictions, and you have to check the licenses with it. For instance, if you use a GNU licensed product, you can't sell it. You have to turn around and give it away for free.
Are you talking about shareware?
Sort of. GNU licensing is a little more complicated. Anytime you give somebody a copy of it, you're also supposed to make available all the source code and all the materials you use to build it, so that if that person decides they want to modify it, they can. And then, in turn, if they release something with it, they have to turn around and hand it to somebody else. There's nothing that prevents you from selling it. It's just that it's kind of hard to sell when somebody else can turn around and modify it and sell it again also. Shareware titles, on the other hand, fall somewhere in between the hobbyist developers and the professional developers. These are usually the guys that are referred to as the indie game developers. These are guys that actually do it for money. I, for instance, am an indie developer. I've written my own titles that I sell online and still sell copies of to this day of some of my cheesy old puzzle games. It's only been 7 years since I released Boulder Panic, and I still get a check in the mail from time to time. These guys have an interesting balancing act. The hobbyist developer doesn't have to make anybody happy but himself. The indie developer, if he wants to make money off of it, has to make the crowd happy. Basically, you're designing a product for an audience. Now you've got to make sure that the audience is appeased by what you're doing. It's kind of hard balancing act because just because you like the idea doesn't mean everybody else is going to. I've worked on at least one title so far that ended up getting trashed because we thought it sounded like a cool idea. It wasn't really. When everybody else started playing with it, the comments that we got back usually ended up resulting in pretty much just trashing the project. We had designs on actually continuing to bring it back to life, but it never happened. The indie developer also has an interesting problem in that there's a point at which you have to decide, am I going to just make games and sell them online for a little bit of money on the side? Or am I going to try and make this my full-time job? Now, just to give you an idea, there exists independent developers who make tons of money. PopCap Games. They sell nothing more than
I love PopCap games.
I like some of their stuff too. Bejeweled and Zuma and oh yes, there's a bunch of titles. The thing about it is they have an entire business built off an independent style of design. Now, one of the reasons why they're called independents you don't get paid up front. A professional development team actually gets paid to develop a product. The publisher turns around, publishes the product, and you get a little bit of payment towards the back end for every copy that's sold. Independent developers, on the other hand, you're fronting the bill for everything. If you want to buy an engine, you got to buy it yourself. That's $250,000 out of pocket, or you can go easy with it. The Garage Games engines is about $100. With some of this stuff, though, you have to kind of weigh how many hours am I really going to work to get this done. Most independent projects are flops, quite honestly, because they don't realize how much goes into it. In fact, if you're thinking about getting into it, start with a mod. It's much easier. You have a core to build up off of to start with, and you get you an idea of the process of how to get into it. That doesn't mean you can't make money off of game development. As a matter of fact, you can. Independent developers, again, like PopCap Games, do a great job of it, but you might not be aware of the history of some of these guys. id Software was a very large independent developer for a very long time. Let's face it, they've written some of the highest selling games in history. Blizzard was considered to be an independent developer for a long time. You can get there. It takes a long time to do it though, and you're going to have to work awfully hard to pull it off. You're also going to have to pick the right tools, the right techniques, and everything else to get it to happen. But you also have to pick the right friends to work with. And that's the last part of it, because usually these games aren't written by one guy. These are written by teams of people. I'm lucky. I managed to pull off a couple of games on my own. Most of the time you're going to end up with 5 or 6 people, and you're going to spend 18 to 20 months developing one game. That doesn't mean it's impossible or to get discouraged by it. Instead, kick back, relax, have fun while you're doing it. If you're having fun, you're going to have a lot more likelihood of actually completing your project. And in the next couple of developer segments, we're going to cover a lot more about it, about the tools and techniques you can use to finish up and get a project done.